Days like today have become some of my favorite in the kitchen lately, and it's because I've discovered a relatively new to me cuisine. We're making Persian food today, and I feel a little bit miffed that I wasn't exposed to Persian food sooner than I was. It is excellent, and I don't know why it's not as prevalent in my circles or in my city as other foods are. I absolutely love it. It's no surprise, as a lot of the flavors are really similar to other cuisines that I love, like Greek food as an example, but the recipes that I'm making today are my kind of deconstructed version of some classic Persian dishes. So if Persian food is your culture, or you frequently cook it or eat it at restaurants, I'd love to know some of the recipes that you like to make or to eat. Please leave them in the comments down below. I am very keen to learn more about Persian food. So today we're making two pretty traditional dishes from what I can tell, and they are dishes that I've definitely had at takeout before, but my goal today was to deconstruct them a little bit to make them easy for me to make for a weeknight. So combine the two things we're making today on top of some rice, and you have a beautiful dinner and even some beautiful leftovers. So the two things we're making today: first, we're making a Persian cucumber yogurt dip called mast-o-khiar, and you'll have to excuse my pronunciation, but it's very similar to tzatziki, but more Persian flavors. And we're also making a deconstructed kebab, koobideh kebabs to be exact. So for me, this is a beef and lamb kebab with some delicious sweet and savory mix-ins. I absolutely love these herbs, spices, and flavors, and I hope that you do too. So the first thing we're gonna do is get started on the meat. And again, this is a deconstructed kebab. So it's really as simple as cooking some ground beef, ground lamb, and some herbs, spices, mix-ins in a cast iron skillet over a hot heat to try to get it really, really crispy and super flavorful. The first thing I'm gonna do is grate an onion, and I'm gonna grate this because I want to extract some of the liquid, but I also want it to just meld into the back of the kebab. So using the large side of my box grater, I'm just gonna grate this onion. Okay, that's about as far as I'm willing to go. I don't want to sacrifice my fingers to this grater. I am sacrificing my tears though. Whew, that is a very fragrant onion. Okay, so through my tears here, I'm just gonna move the onion and the juice into this fine mesh sieve, and I'm gonna let this sit off to the side a little bit. Just drain, get some of that liquid out. Next step is our ground meat mixture. I've done this with all beef, all lamb, and I personally like a mix of beef and lamb, and you don't need 2 full pounds. You can scale this down if you like. I like to make a lot of this because it is absolutely delicious, and I love it for leftovers. So 2 pounds it is for me. And then I scale up the spices accordingly to how much meat I have. So I'm using sumac and turmeric, which are 2 spices that I use in my kitchen, but not as frequently as a lot of others. Having researched quite a bit when I was trying to come up with this flavor profile, there are all sorts of different spices that you can include. And I'm not even sure what are the most traditional spices, but for me, this combination works perfectly. So in with the meat go turmeric and sumac. And of course, as always, when you're working with turmeric, be really careful because it will stain anything that it comes into contact with. I'm gonna add a decent amount of salt. This is again 2 pounds of meat, so we're not gonna go shy on the salt. Pepper. Couple cloves of garlic. Call it 4. And then you can grate the garlic on a microplane if you like, but I really love using this little garlic mincer. It's almost like a ricer for garlic. So I'm just gonna crush these cloves and run them through my garlic press. Okay, garlic is minced right into the bowl. And before I get my hands mucky, because I'm gonna get my hands right in and mix all of this together, I'm gonna prep the final 2 ingredients in our meat mixture. And these are not going in right away. They're gonna go in at the end of the cooking. But I really like to add some walnuts that I've chopped. So I'm gonna add a couple handfuls of walnuts. Just chop those up a little bit. And some raisins. I really love the combination of sweet and savory and nutty and salty. It's such a delicious combination. The raisins get nice and sweet and kind of meld into the meat, and the walnuts toast because we're putting it in at the end of that high heat cook, and it's really delicious. Okay, these go right in with the raisins. Now I'm going to mix our meat mixture up. So you can see that there's a fair amount of liquid that came out of these onions. I'm just gonna give it a little help. We don't need to have them completely dry, but I find that the beef browns and gets crispy a little bit better when I'm not introducing a whole bunch of liquid from the onion. So that's perfect for me. It's still a little bit liquidy, but we've taken out probably a good 1/4 cup of liquid. So that's gonna go right in. And then I'm just gonna use my hands and combine all of this together. I'm not trying to bring it into any sort of a shape, although if you were making kebabs, you toss an egg into this and make kebab shapes. I'm just trying to get it worked through so that the 2 types of meat are mixed together and all of the garlic, onion, and spices are mixed through. That is looking just about perfect. Pretty well mixed through. The next step is just to cook this. I'm gonna give my hands a wash, move this over to the stove, and we're gonna get to cooking. All right, over a pretty decently high heat, I'm gonna add a couple tablespoons of avocado oil to a cast iron skillet and let that heat up. Just want to coat the bottom. So the method here is a little bit different probably than browning ground beef that you brown in the past. So I'm just going to take pieces of this meat mixture and drop them into the pan. I want this to be crispy and definitely dark brown. So the way to achieve that first is to start with cast iron. It gets really hot and heats pretty uniformly when it's hot. Second is to use a little bit of oil to help the meat mixture brown. And third is to get as much contact with the meat and the pan as I can and then leave it alone. I'm just gonna let it cook and do its thing. I'm not gonna completely mince it up this first go around. We'll do that in a little bit. Okay, on to the cucumber yogurt dip as our beef continues to cook. And this is exactly what it sounds like. So I start with a couple cups of Greek yogurt. I just estimate this. This is a very forgiving dip. Little tiny bit of salt, a little bit of black pepper, and the majority of this dip beyond the yogurt is cucumber. And if you can get them, use Persian cucumbers. I couldn't find any in my grocery store, so I've got an English cucumber, a whole bunch of mint. I like a little bit of lime as well, and then some walnuts. We're just gonna mix all those things together, and we've got our dip. So let's start with the lime. Just gonna squeeze it directly in with the yogurt. Okay, cucumber next. I'm just gonna cut this into like, I don't know, 1/4-inch pieces or so. And I like to leave the skin on, though you can remove the skin if you like. Should have picked a bigger bowl. Story of my life. Okay, gonna add some walnuts. So I'm just gonna give these a rough chop. I want them to be a little bit bigger than I did in the meat mixture, but still don't necessarily want halves of walnuts, so rough chop it is. Right into the bowl. And next, a whole bunch of mint. I'm not gonna use all of this, but this is kind of a choose your own adventure on the mint. I want at least like 3 solid tablespoons of mint, but I like really flavorful sauces, so if you want something a little bit more refined, a little more demure, use less mint. That's good enough for me. It's gonna go right in the bowl. And then I need to get back to that meat mixture. So I'm gonna set this off to the side. We'll stir it up when we're ready to serve. Okay, back at the stove. And we've got some very browned meat. Exactly what I wanted. Might even be a little bit too far, but I like it really brown and crispy, so it's good for me. And that's what I'm looking for. Really dark, nice and crispy. A lot of good color. While that continues to cook, let's mix up our yogurt sauce in this teeny tiny little bowl. Okay, that's nicely mixed. So this is gonna hang out in the fridge until we're ready to serve. The next step is to add the walnuts and the raisins. So I'm gonna add those directly in. So there's some nice crispy bits on the bottom here that I don't wanna lose track of. And so I'm gonna deglaze this pan with just a tiny little bit of water. You could use stock, could maybe even use some wine, though that is likely not traditional to Persian cuisine, but I am gonna deglaze with just a little bit of water. Okay, so this is all done. I've got all the brown bits. I can smell the walnuts starting to toast up a little bit. I'm gonna pull this off the heat and I'm gonna put our Persian feast together. Okay, we're ready to plate. So you absolutely can eat this with rice and it would be a delicious dinner. For something a little bit lighter though, the way I like to plate it is some of the cucumber yogurt dip on the bottom, a little bit of olive oil over the top, then some of our meat mixture, tiny little bit of flaky salt, and some mint leaves. There's one last sweet treat that I absolutely love. You can find it, pomegranate molasses drizzled over the top. It's delicious, and I would highly recommend it. And there we have a delicious Persian feast. Deconstructed kebabs with cucumber yogurt dip. And now it's finally time to taste. I cannot believe I've been sleeping on Persian food for so long and have just discovered it in the last couple of years. This is a dynamite meal, and it feels so much more decadent with all of the different flavors and textures, sweetness and savoriness, but it's really, in my book, pretty healthy. For someone who's relatively new to Persian cuisine, I can absolutely recommend this recipe as an entrance. It's worked very well for me, and I hope you'll give it a try. If you do, please let me know in the comments down below. I always love to hear about it. If you liked this video, please give it a like. If you want to see more from me, please subscribe to the channel. I'd love to have you. And I look forward to seeing you here next time. Cheers!